Today we're going to start a two-part project to fill in this area between the downtown and the port by building a few different things that hopefully are going to encapsulate the way that modern services have begun to slowly take over this stretch of the waterfront. The same area in Duluth seems to have once had a row of docks here that have since been filled in and repurposed. You can even see what I think are remnants of these docks left in the map terrain. You can see these in real life as well, of course, and I think that's as good a starting point as any. I started off by reintroducing one of the old docks, both because I wanted there to be a more visible hint to the historical setup of this area, and also because I thought it would leave a nice visual buffer between the industrial and the non-industrial portions of this build, which is something that I'm going to explain in more detail later on. We're going to start over on this side of the area with the most modern development. For this build, we're going to take a little road trip down to Milwaukee. In their harbor, they have the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee School of Freshwater Sciences, I think it's called, which has this cool building that's kind of fancy and modern around front and brutalist around back. Taking some inspiration from this, I wanted to build our own freshwater research institute. I think this will help establish the timeline of the waterfront's development because you have the Arena District built in the 60s, the Festival Park built after that, the Mixed-Use Pier built sometime in the 2000s probably, and then finally this Research Institute, which have all progressively taken over more and more of once was this prime industrial land. To build it, I'm taking a few copies of this warehouse building, which happens to have the right corrugated exterior, and attaching it to the back of this fancy modern building, which kind of ironically is actually meant to be a functional harbor asset. Across the street from the school in Milwaukee, there's this corporate office for a mining company. And I didn't really think that a recreation would work in the spot we're working in, but I wanted to create something that's sort of like this campus here. And maybe you guys could help me out in the comments to figure out what company is actually housed here. Oh, and I wanted to build a couple of giant parking lots as well. Bet you didn't see that coming. They seem to have a public parking area and then behind it a fenced off parking area and a storage lot attached to it. So I wanted to build something like that here. I'm also going to add this loading area as well. It's probably a little excessive to have 5 garages for this kind of place and this size of place. But it probably is also excessive to have 192 parking spots, so maybe we can just imagine that this whole thing is scaled up a bit from the inspiration. Or maybe it also hosts additional classrooms or purposes that are not just for the freshwater science school and all the research that goes on there. To represent all that functionality, I'm going to clip in office block and a university block as well into the structure. I also had added a few of these to the corporate campus office, a few of the office blocks off camera as well, just in case you were interested about that. As for the details in this area, I wanted the main visual component to be this stack of containers, much like the one they have in Milwaukee, although ours goes a little bit more vertical because I just like stacking containers on top of one another. And then that's basically going to be counterbalanced by a variety of kind of more aquatic-leaning clutter. A lot of the boat assets I had on hand only had floating versions available, which don't look so nice when they're placed on land, so I was kind of limited on the types of boats that I could place here. But we'll just have to imagine that maybe they've faced some budget cuts recently and had to buy some used canoes or something. The final functional component for the school is going to start off with this floating dock, which works as a ferry dock. I thought that this build was going to look kind of dead, and it would be sort of pointless without some kind of water-based activity going on around it. So I'm going to run the city's very first ferry route from here, connecting it to a new depot that's clipped into the building, and then running it all the way down through the bay, down the barrier island, and then back around on the far side, returning it all the way to the school. So that we could actually get boats moving along this path, I'm going to add a stop over at this dummy city that I have at the edge of the map, which I had earlier in the series called Madison, in reference to the very famously coastal city of Madison, Wisconsin. I was also pretty limited on the sorts of functional boat assets that I could find that looked kind of more official. So the ones I ended up choosing, I think look perfect, with the only problem being that they're actually labeled Coast Guard, which no one probably would have noticed if I had just not said anything. But this is all kind of in line with something I'd like to add more of in the future, which is having functional boats moving around the bay and the lake as well. Different fishing boats, pleasure boats, and also maybe some more kind of unique ones like this as well. And that's not even to mention all the big lake freighters that I would like to have moving around at some point, if I can find some nice ship assets that can stand in for lake freighters. Anyway, back at the dock, I'm going to scatter around a few floating boat props next to the dock, and then we're going to move on to the next part of the build. The street that runs next to the school and the office would have been the beginning of the next phase of development here. And it would have been built either on the filled-in dock that used to be here, or maybe on the edge of the next pier over. Either way, for inspiration here, I decided to go back to Duluth and look at this dock, which appears to be some sort of old industrial facility that's been cleared. I'm thinking that the next phase of development the city would have planned here would be to rip up all the pavement and level everything and build a park adjacent to the street. Maybe something that's a bit more natural than the festival park that we made a few episodes ago. More focused on giving people a place to walk around and be sort of immersed in nature while still having the views of the harbor without having to leave the city. Maybe one day in the series we'll come back and kind of bring that idea to life here, get rid of all these details that I'm putting down now and make it look a bit more like a park. But for now, it's just going to remain as this cleared brownfield land. I wanted to give this almost like a two-dimensional look with just a few details to give it a little bit of relief and add some texture. So we mostly just have the remaining concrete floor and the paved roadways with a couple of stubby lengths of wall left. There are also these long rows of material, the idea for which I yoinked from Duluth. I'm not exactly sure what the purpose of these things are. Maybe it's like material that's being staged for the next steps in whatever project they're doing here. But mostly I'm just adding it for the texture and the appearance of it. To give some detail to the cleared areas, I'm using these big decals that I found on the workshop and defining a couple of different areas on the dock. So up against the water, we have a lusher area where more vegetation has taken root, where it has this nice disturbed land that's been eroding into the lake slowly. And then up top, there's this more gravelly area, which presumably has been graded fairly recently because it's nice and flat and free of vegetation. Working out from both the paved area and the cleared surfaces, I'm going to fill in the rest of the area with these shrub props and also some tufts of grass at the fringes, so you kind of get this taper from the denser foliage to the less dense foliage. And then any of the remaining areas are going to get a nice dirt decal where the vegetation hasn't been able to take root yet. This does seem like the sort of place that would attract urban explorers, so I'm going to use this classic set of broken fence props to show that there are a couple of places where people have broken it down to get in and poke around. I can't say I approve of people breaking public property in my city, but I would probably still watch the inevitable YouTube video that they put out. To represent that they've already started on the next phase of development, I'm going to cap off the road with a park inspired by the Harborview Plaza in Milwaukee, which is right between the two buildings that we took inspiration from before. I promise it's less blurry in real life, but I just couldn't get any actual photographs of it that I have the rights to use in a video. So this is the view that we get. To emphasize the contrast between the plaza and the torn down facility, I'm going to fit these mown grass decals around the turnaround. I suppose I could have also done the same thing to the center as well, like using an IMT filler on an invisible network, but I don't think that's really necessary because eventually I'm going to cover the whole thing with foliage. So I'm just going to settle for disappearing the sidewalk with this grass network. I wanted the main attraction of this plaza to have its roots in the character of the city. So I'm going to use this asset, which I believe was created in reference to one of City Planner Play's projects. And we're going to appropriate it for our own purposes, turning it into our city color, which is like a reddish purple. Probably more of a purple in this case. But I think that the A and the anchor being combined together is pretty much perfect given the context here. As much as I usually like to have things look nice and cohesive from a distance, I also like to occasionally have these things that stand out a bit more, especially in terms of their color, so they really pop from a distance. I feel like every city has a few buildings or monuments like this that are like bright yellow or whatever, and just make the rest of the city feel more cohesive in comparison. But now that I've said that, I do think that I made the color too muted on this thing, and now I want to go turn it this shade. Maybe I'll do that. For the final touch on this dock, I'm going to try to copy this remnant of the corner of the old wharf that seems to have been left here for whatever reason in Duluth. And I think that's just an interesting little detail to finish off on. It's a really quick and simple build. I'm just using this concrete dock prop and forming it into the right shape with PO. And then I'm going to add in, I guess they would be the old pilings kind of marching out on either side. So for the part of this build after the corner here, I recorded so much detailing that the edit ended up being way too long, like almost an hour for the final video. So I decided to break it up into 2 parts. So you've just watched the first part, and I'm going to try to upload the next one next week. So if all goes well, I'll see you then. Hope you enjoyed the build. Thank you to this month's channel members, with a special shout out to my $5 tier members, New, Peter J, and Victor Sellon. And thank you for watching.